It's like it was yesterday. I was praying for a miracle, scared to have a little hope. And now looking back today, seeing all the things you've done, I can't even add them up. 1, 2, 3, up to infinity. I'd run out of numbers before I could thank you for everything. God, I'm still counting my blessings, all that you've done in my life. The more that I look in the details, the more of your goodness I'll find. And Father, on this side of heaven, I know that I'll run out of time, but I will keep counting my blessings, knowing I can't count that high. And I know the seasons never last forever, so God, I will remember all of the reasons my heart has to be grateful. All the times you've been faithful to me. God, I'm still counting my blessings, all that you've done in my life. The more that I look in the details, the more of your goodness I'll find. Father, on this side of heaven, I know that I will run out of time, but I will keep counting my blessings, knowing I can't count that high. Oh, I can't count that high. I'd run out of numbers before I could thank you for everything. God, I'm still counting my blessings, all that you've done in my life. The more that I look in the details, the more of your goodness I'll find. Father, on this side of heaven, I know that I will run out of time, but I will keep counting my blessings, knowing I can't count that high. I will keep counting my blessings, knowing I can't count that high.
When I am down and oh my soul so weary, when troubles come and my heart burdened be, then I am still and wait here in the silence until you come and sit a while with me. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be.
What are you most proud about from your life?
My children.
Good answer.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. I'm proud of how you and Jenny have turned out, what you've done with your life. I'm thankful that Bev did such a good job in raising you. And I'm thankful for God for all the gifts that He's given me throughout my life.
That's awesome. And when you die, what's gonna happen?
I'm going to be with Jesus.
Amen. Amen. Any regrets?
Oh yeah, lots of regrets. But regrets are in a way. No, see, I've learned something in my 77 years. It's all wrapped together. Regrets are a waste of time because you learn something new every day. And what I've learned this year is that part of the unhappiness in my life came because I was fighting God's plan. But I had my plan, you see. And then it dawned on me this year, if I had just allowed myself to follow God's plan, I would have been a lot happier. Which now that I've learned that, I think it's going to be smooth sailing the rest of the trip.
When you stop fighting.
And things I thought were so important or so bad mean nothing now. Because I realized that was my plan. Now I'm on His plan.
That's awesome. All right. Well, this is what I'm going to show at your memorial. So, well spoken.
Dailies for everybody.
All right.
These projects because these were major renovation projects. But no, he was a one-man show for many years. He worked on many projects including building the construction of a 9,000 square foot youth center at Dockwater State Beach, the construction of a public viewing area and public parking lot at Dan Blocker Beach, the Zuma Beach general improvements, the Will Rogers Coastline Viewing Pier and parking lot, the construction and repairs of multiple beach accessways in Malibu, and of course, the beach nourishment projects at Dockwater Beach, Venice Beach, and Cabrillo Beach. Greg Woodell's dedication to beach planning and coastal preservation left an inedible mark on the field, and his contributions to benefit coastal communities. His work was with the county, CSBPA, and ASBPA, along with his innovative projects and lobbying efforts, have had a lasting impact on coastal preservation. And because of this, in 2005, he won the ASBPA's highest honor, the Murrow P. O'Brien Award, cementing his legacy among his professional peers. I had the privilege of learning directly from Greg. Through his wisdom and generosity of spirit, I came to understand not only the technicalities of coastal preservation, but also the profound importance of passion, perseverance, and humility of achieving our goals. Thank you.
My name's Candy Harding, and I'd like to share with Greg's family and friends how he blessed my husband and I, and our little band of faith seekers. Almost 3 years ago, our church had sign-ups for a new video series for small groups. And we volunteered to have a group in our home. We are a random group of folks, 3 guys and 7 women, married and singles, 70s, 80s, and 90s. That's our ages, not year of birth. We met weekly in the mornings for an hour and a half, or so I thought. Greg would go to Mass first, and then, because he didn't want to go home, he would stop by a lovely little bakery on the way to my house. I learned I better get the kitchen cleaned up early because he was coming 30 minutes early with his goodies. If you know Greg, then you know his smile would light up the room. His laugh was contagious, and we were always glad to see him, even though he was very early. The format was watching a video, discuss the questions in the book, and share a bit about what we learned. Well, that might have been what we were supposed to do, but Greg was there to seek the truth. He was unafraid to ask questions. Y'all know that. He shared his failures. He shared his deep love for his family. He did love you, his country, and also he shared his faith in God. Since Greg was so open about questions, doubts, why do we do what we do? Why do we believe such and such? The rest of the group shared freely, and they asked questions too. We got off the subject a lot. Eventually, it was decided that we just needed to go back to Exodus and reread and study so we could appreciate a little more about the culture and the faith at the time of Christ. We dug in and we studied and we shared. He was such a seeker of truth. He'd been to the source. He went to the Holy Land twice. He went to Ephesus, where Paul preached, and he was ready to go again. He shared his experiences and generously shared with us little presents from his travels. He brought me soap from Subiaco, where he went on retreat. He brought calendars. He brought holy waters and a beautiful book of saints at Christmas. As he shared his life experiences, we discovered that he was a pretty important guy in California. Not that he said that. He was very modest. I'm blown away by that. And your talk. Wow. It became apparent that he had lived a life of service to the community in California with the Osage and in Bentonville. We were amazed that he ran for JP, and we were so glad because he was unopposed, and we knew that he would bring such a huge wealth of experience. And we weren't surprised when he told us at the first meeting, he asked a question. We loved that. To Bill and Jen and the grands and the great-grands and the nieces and nephews, Greg set an example to follow. He had faith in God, and he was unafraid to be who he was. He had a strong sense of ethics and a desire to serve the greater good. He loved his country. Oh boy, did he ever. And he served in the Army in wartime in Vietnam. For our generation, that's a big deal. What an example he was. And besides that, guys, he always looked good. Polish your loafers. I know how much you loved Greg. He was so rich in family, and he loved you so much. Our little group, we only had him for just a short time, and we miss him so much. I know how much more you do. Our consolation is that we know without a doubt he is asking questions of Jesus right now. And he knows all the answers. I wish we did, but he does. And we also know that we will see him again. We just had such a short time. You know, when you come to Bentonville, you find out everybody else has moved here too. And we don't know your background, you know. But he truly showed by the way he lived who he was. And you have a lot to be proud of and a lot to live up to. Thank you.
Well, that is a lot to follow. So as we learned, Greg was an accomplished businessman. He was a dedicated Christian servant. He was a patriot. He was a gentleman, always. But he was also a dedicated public servant. You know, I first met Greg as Jen's dad and Maverick, Wyatt, and Jesse's grandpa. And that's how I knew him. And I knew a little bit about him. And I knew he was gruff. And then I met him. And he was really gruff. And, you know, just kind of hard to get through. And as you got to know him, I realized I would call him my porcupine because he was prickly on the outside and just squishy on the inside. He was made of heart. He came to Bentonville as what he called an escapee from California. But when he got here, he was immediately one of us. He was dedicated to this community. He was dedicated to the families and the people that he met. And I admired that in him. He worked hard to serve. He was a one-of-a-kind person. You could count on him for anything. He would always keep us on track in our discussions. In our county meetings, sometimes a little passionately, would get us back on track for our discussions. He ran our election headquarters flawlessly. I think there was nothing more that he loved than selling Trump merchandise. He would just hawk it. Every time anybody walked in, he was hawking the merchandise. He loved that. He never missed a single day working at the Benton County Fair. When Greg was dedicated to something, he was 100% in with his whole heart. He took such pride in everything he did in helping people, and I appreciated that. He was a good example. He rolled up his sleeves, and he wasn't afraid to work. He also ran our Reagan Day dinners with us, and we would have these meetings, and they were kind of endless meetings, but they were always at Greg's house. He loved to host. I'd say, you can have it at my house. He's like, nope, it's at my house. I'm like, okay. That way I didn't have to clean my kitchen before he came over, because clearly he came early, as you mentioned. But he was the best host. He would make sure that there was always coffee, there were always sweets, there were always plenty of pens and paper so you could take notes. And if you didn't bring an agenda, Greg would have one available for you. So he wanted to be sure that everything ran smoothly. As a matter of fact, as I was writing my speech, I wrote it. I have a bad habit of writing something up, and then I mark it up, right? And then I'm ready to go. So if you look at my speech, it is not pleasant. And I could hear Greg's voice saying, just let me retype that for you. Just let me. And I was like, I like it the way it is. So sorry, Greg, I'm not letting you retype it today. But he also took great care in people. And I homeschooled with Jen. And so I would bring my kids everywhere I went. And he met my youngest, I think Jonathan might have been 7 when they met, so he was pretty young, a little bit into everything, as you can only imagine. And Greg took a special liking to him, kind of took him under his wing. He'd call him Peanut, who's now 5'9", but he'd call him Peanut, and he would take care of him. He always sent me home with treats for the boys, just to make sure that they knew that they were cared for and loved. And that's who he was. He made sure everything ran smoothly. He made sure that you knew you were welcomed and that you were valued. Greg was dedicated to making sure that we in Benton County didn't become California. And I think maybe 4 years ago, he decided we need to redo the way we do elections in the Republican Party. And so he took it upon himself to make sure he knew all the information for every election that was running in Benton County, when they could file, when the elections were, and then he put together, as you can only imagine, a binder of information that talked about everything you needed to know to run for office. And I was so glad to see that one day Greg decided to run for office because he needed to. He had a strong voice. And so he ran unopposed, as mentioned, for Justice of the Peace for District 9. And when he did that, he attended every meeting before he was ever elected. He attended the planning meetings and the finance meetings. He wanted to know everything there was to know so that when he came into office, he could ask all the right questions, which he did endlessly. Greg's passing leaves a hole in our hearts, and he leaves a hole in our community. He is definitely irreplaceable. His dedication, his humor, his giant laugh, which I loved hearing on the video. I love that laugh. Those are things that can't be replaced. But he's left us a good example of what it means to be fiercely dedicated to what you believe in and how to make a difference in your community and in your family. I think he had his priorities straight. He loved the Lord, he loved his family, and he took care of his community. And I don't think there's anything more that you can ask of a man than to do that. And I think it's a great legacy that he leaves. So I will say he served his country well, he served his community well, and he served his family well. And I'm grateful for the time that I had to get to know him. Thank you.
Hello. I am, what? Oh, okay, sorry. I'm Jessie. I'm one of his granddaughters. And as we celebrate his life, I've spent time thinking of who he was, who Grandpa was to the people in his life. And as we've heard, he was a lot of things to a lot of people. But the person he was to us was different from the person he was to many of you. He wasn't the successful beach planner or the passionate Republican. He was just Grandpa. Only a few weeks ago, while I visited Grandpa in the hospital, I heard of just a handful of his vast accomplishments. He told me what he'd done in California, all of the important people he had talked to, and all the plans that he had advocated for. As I listened, I realized he was an important person. To others, he was someone that earned his voice in circles and in circumstances. But to us, he was a man we respected because we loved him as a grandpa, a man who cared for us and for our futures. He was one of the most generous men I have ever had the honor of knowing. If you think he was proud and passionate for the future of his work or the status of his political party, you wouldn't believe how that multiplied towards his grandkids. What I admire most about him and wish I had been more grateful for was his generosity. He was so generous with us, ready to meet any need that we had. He helped pay for our high school tuition, and in return, we cleaned his house every 2 weeks. And every 2 weeks, he would take us to lunch after because he wanted to spend more time with us. Looking back, I do cherish those moments with him and wish my younger self knew how sweet and dear to me those lunches would have become. He continued to support us as we went off to college, buying us computers for graduation, and always asking how our college experience was going. There was never a time that I saw him where he didn't tell me that he was there for anything that I needed. And it wasn't an empty promise either. He wanted our futures to be full, and he was ready to sacrifice himself so that we could see our full potential too. Grandpa did so many things in his life, more than all of us will ever know. But when he was with us, it didn't matter. He didn't boast of his accomplishments. We were his accomplishments. He was proud of us, wanted the best for us, and encouraged us to be our best. During one of my last visits in the hospital with him, he asked me dozens of questions about my life and my school, my boyfriend and my future. It's like he wanted to know all he could about my life before he couldn't ask anymore. It will be one of my most cherished moments and memories with him because it was such a clear representation of his care for me. However, I will not cherish these things sadly, but know that my memories of him were an example of God's faithfulness, and Grandpa's love for us was an outpouring of God's Spirit in his life. How exciting it will be to see him again in God's perfect presence. Thank you.
Yeah, I too didn't know a lot of his accomplishments because he was so humble. And like Jesse said, It was like we were his accomplishments and his family, and I had a hard time trying to write something that, anyways, all a good father or grandfather could want in life is for his family and his children to be safe, and safe in God's arms and happy and healthy in this life. And good fathers give and take punches to ensure that his family is safe. The war against communism in the 60s and 70s meant artillery shells and bullets in Vietnam, but in recent years became a subtle stream of propaganda fed to everybody worldwide and at home. This isn't to talk politics at Grandpa's memorial, it's to talk war. Grandpa Greg was always so kind and classy and generous to us all. But over the last several years, I saw him turn his heart to the Lord Jesus. And he set aside any deception to fight the good fight for all of us. During this time, he blessed and served our community and Republicans in Arkansas. And he loved his family and his church so well. And his service, but this service was just an outpouring of the spiritual change which took place in his heart and in his mind and in his prayers and at Mass and at church and in Israel and at home and wherever his travels took him. God did something greater than I or anyone could ever ask in Grandpa Greg. And even for me, he stood in a breach, praying and working for what's right. And often he prayed for me. In my hour of greatest need, he prayed for me and my family. He loved us very much and showered us with gifts and praise. And you can see in the pictures of his last Christmas newsletter just how happy and proud he was of my sons. My sons who made it, not to just one or two, but they clinched the top spot of 3 photos in this little newsletter. And his last words, he wanted to make sure that I passed on my love, his love, to my wife and to Jane, my daughter. He had many accomplishments and many victories, but to me, his spiritual fight and his political fight that followed, these were his greatest victories to me, letting the Lord change him. And I'm so wonderful that he took that video. That how could I explain that? But you heard it from his mouth about how he gave up fighting for his own plan to fight a different plan for all of us. And everybody here is, I think, impacted by that. But especially me. I wonder how many of his prayers were for me. In his spiritual fight to seek the Lord and pray were his greatest victories. And his love and kindness for all of us, he was more than wonderful, and that is more than a grandson could ever ask, and a grandfather. I guess I don't know if somebody was going to read this or not, but it meant something to Grandpa, so I wanted to read it. But in his last newsletter, he's got a picture of these tombstones here with the words Grandpa wrote saying, "Rest easy, sleep well, know the line has been held, your job is done. Rest easy, sleep well, others have taken up where you fell, and the line is held, peace, peace, and farewell."
I'm going to do my best. Thank you all for being here today as we celebrate my dad's life. Dad had a remarkable life, but like everyone, it was full of joys and pains, good decisions and bad, and things we want to remember forever, and some things we'd like to forget. But all of those things made Dad who he was, and God had a plan for each and every one of them. Dad was known for being strong and tenacious, kind and funny, thoughtful, and yes, a little bit scary sometimes. A side of him he really didn't see in himself. I remember telling Dad one time, actually, Cesar, it was after a meeting that I actually attended. And I was sitting in the back going, what? And I came out and I said, Dad, I feel like you were kind of intense in that meeting. And he replied, me? No, I'm a teddy bear. Both of those things were true. He could be scary, but it was because he felt things so intensely and so passionately. And when something was right, he needed other people to know it. Yeah, so that usually came out because he was intense about things being right. He excelled at many areas of his life, and just enough failure to learn from, grow, and improve on. He was blessed with a loving family he deeply cherished and showed up for us whenever he could. His career was something he was devoted to, and he had countless friends he would have done anything for. If he had the means to help, he did. When I was writing this and thinking about it, I kept thinking my dad would have given you the shirt off his back if you needed it. And then I thought, no, he really liked his Brooks Brothers shirts. But he would take you anywhere you wanted to go to buy you a shirt. He often stopped by my house early to invite me to breakfast. And no matter how many times I asked him to call first, he would always just show up when I was still in my pajamas. We did do breakfast quite regularly, and he loved going to Cracker Barrel and the Buttered Biscuit. Most of our talks were about the kids, politics, Jesus, and the Bible. Many of our breakfast conversations would turn to how he thought he could help me do things better. It wasn't always encouraging, and I had to keep reminding him, Dad, I'm 50 years old. But I learned over the years that it truly came from a place of love and the planner in him who just couldn't help himself. I could talk about all of his accomplishments, But what I'm most proud of and thankful for was his decision to move to Arkansas 8 years ago and to start a new chapter of life near his children and grandchildren. I'm pretty sure he would say it was the best move he ever made. The time we got to spend with him these last 8 years is something I will always be grateful for. Having him living down the street, his presence at our family gatherings, and our kids seeing him on the regular and growing in those relationships. I would say that Dad's life was exciting and challenging, full of travel, and defined by love for his work and the many friends he made along the way. He truly made friends everywhere he went. For instance, a few years ago, he decided to go to Disney World instead of be with us for Thanksgiving. It was a great opportunity. It was cheap. So he went by himself and came home with all of the tales of the 3 lovely ladies that he met and spent the next 3 days palling around all of the parks. That wasn't the first time he'd done that. He did that all over Europe when he was 20, too. There were 2 girls, pictures, lots of pictures of them. They were just his pals. One of my favorite things about my dad was that he was silly and goofy. It wasn't something he did around most people. He was very dignified. A funny look, a silly voice, a goofy picture. I will miss his laugh, not his everyday laugh, but the one he did when he cracked himself up. It was the best. Dad has always been a searcher, and we even found poetry he wrote decades ago talking about his desire to know God better. It wasn't until the last few years, though, that he truly gave his heart to Christ and understood what that meant. It has been one of the greatest joys and answers to prayer to see him come to know Christ as his Lord and Savior. His life reflected the changes God had made in his heart. Even though the loss here is great, I have no greater joy than to know that he is with the Lord. Dad, we'll miss your surprise visits, your thoughtful advice, your laugh, and your presence in our lives. Thank you for the legacy you've left us, one of family, faith, and the courage to start fresh chapters, even later in life. I love you.
I realized over the past 2 weeks, memories don't become precious until they become limited, when you don't get any more of them. When memories are suddenly cut off, you truly cherish all the ones you have. Some of the memories I have are of my dad and I putting up Christmas lights together, throwing a frisbee, going to work with him in the marina, the laundromat on the weekend, traveling to New York and to Washington, D.C., shopping at Macy's for my first tailored suit. More recently, playing pickleball together and then morning breakfast afterwards. Him sponsoring my 50th birthday party at One-Eyed Jack's with the boys, and our recent trip to Tulsa. I remember growing up, Jen and I would look forward to our weekends with Dad because we always did fun stuff together. But I remember one weekend when Jen and I were complaining that we weren't doing anything fun. I remember Dad was hurt. And he told us he wanted us to just enjoy being with him. That was such a spiritual lesson for me later in life. How God isn't an activity ATM machine. He just wants us to enjoy being with him. And in the last 3 weeks of Dad's life, Dad started to lose his ability to speak, and he wanted to tell us so many things. We spent nearly every day with him, all day. And Jen and I got to just be with him, enjoying his presence. And I think Dad loved that more than anything. And so did we. Every day I got to reach down into his bed, and he would give me a big kiss, and he'd hug me with every ounce of strength that he had. One time I knelt by his hospital bed, and he rubbed my hair like I was 6. And I heard him say, "Billy boy." I was trying to think of one word that describes my dad. The word that comes to mind is class, which the dictionary describes as having high standards of personal behavior, admirably skillful and graceful. That was my dad. He did the right things the right way. Brian Arias, Dad's fellow justice of the peace from District 9, he told me the story of Dad attending the JP meetings a year before he was elected to understand what he would be taking on. You know, he had made this giant map. I'm like, "Dad, what is the map all about?" He goes, "This is my district." I'm like, "What are you going to do with that?" He says, "I'm going to drive every street every week so I know who my people are that I'm representing." But over that year, something bothered him. It bothered him that the meeting started with the Pledge of Allegiance and then a prayer. And he suggested that the meeting should begin with the prayer and then the pledge, because God comes before country. And that got approved. Prayer before pledge. And I think this prayer before pledge is really a metaphor for Dad's life. He gave priority to serving his country and his state and his county and his city throughout all of his working life. And in retirement, after moving to Arkansas, he was still dedicated as a public servant, but God and his family became his highest priority. He's able to spend quality time with each of his 4 siblings, who all preceded him in death. His last couple weeks, he made a point that they would have all been there for him, like he was there for them. Dad made sure to be at every family event, to be with his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. He attended church services nearly every day. God and family took precedent over his public service. He got to live out prayer before pledge. Another word that describes my dad, as you've heard, planner. Dad was always 5 steps ahead. He worked to establish the Osage National Merit Scholarship in the 1980s. I received that scholarship in the 90s. His grandchildren are graduating college in the 2020s because he was a planner. Even his California license plate, which is outside on the table, said beach planner. He loved to have a plan for all our lives. We used to have a gospel tract we passed out in college. It said, "God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life." My dad loved us, and he had wonderful plans for our lives. But at the end of his life, as you heard in the video, Dad embraced the ultimate planner and his will for his life. And I'm thankful that Dad ended his days knowing that God's plans for us are better than the plans that we could make for ourselves. In the Bible, it says, God says, I know the plans I have for you, to give you a future and a hope. I'm thankful that God planned for my dad to spend the last years of his life with us. I'm really looking forward to seeing him again, hearing him say the things that he wanted to say, and getting another big kiss and giant hug. Thank you for all being here to honor our dad. It means everything to us.
Oh, okay. We just wanted all of you to know that we'd like you to stay and enjoy some refreshments and some of our dad's favorite treats. When he was in the hospital, he didn't have much of an appetite. And the hospital food was pretty bad. So I think he just didn't want to waste his time on it. But something that we found that he would eat was Rolos, which is a quick little funny story. When we left his GP's office and I was taken into the emergency room, kind of the start of everything, he got in the car and said, "Well, if I'm gonna die," which we didn't know that at the time at all, he goes, "I want a Coke and some Rolos." And we drove right across the street to Come and Go and got a Coke, a real Coke, and Rolos. So, and in the hospital, it wasn't easy to find what he wanted to drink, but my husband searched high and low for Orange Crush. And that became his go-to. And he would look at Nate and he'd be like, "Crush." And Nate would go get it. So we have Orange Crush and Rolos out there. And also some Seeds candy, which I know for all you all, this is not something you know and love, but it was his favorite.
I'm not going to recommend eating the Seeds candy. It doesn't look that good. But there's plenty of Rolos and Orange Crush. No.
Sometimes that happens when you order it online.
So in Dad's final hour in the hospital, just to close the service this morning, Jan and I and Dad's grandchildren were able to hold his hand and share their hearts with him. It was a precious moment that not many people get. Chloe began, as she was holding his hand next to him, singing her favorite hymn, and the rest of the family joined her in proclaiming God's faithfulness to my dad and to us. So I asked her to sing to close out the service. She's going to sing solo, the verse and the chorus, just like she did in the hospital room. And then we'd like you to join us in the second verse and chorus.
Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. And great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. And great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto you stand and sing with me the second verse? Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings all mine and 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great